You know, I really would like to put a new fish into my system today, and they have the fish that I want at my local fish store. But if I went and got them today, I couldn't put them in my system immediately. I would have to quarantine them first. So let's talk about it. Over the years, I have seen people quarantine fish in hundreds of different ways, everything from just a 1-gallon glass jar all the way up to an entire 200-gallon setup, much like the one behind me here, specifically just to quarantine angelfish and tangs before they went into a massive system full of corals. I personally generally just run something like a 5-gallon bucket with a hang on the back filter and a heater, or I've recently set up this little 5-gallon so that it matches this area with the same hang on the back filter and heater. It really doesn't have to be complicated. And that brings me to my first point. Why do we want to quarantine fish anyway? When you get your fish, there's a potential for them to have a pathogen or a problem or some other kind of thing that you don't want going in your main display. So we QT those fish, observe them for a certain amount of time, and maybe even medicate them if it's necessary to get rid of that stuff before we put them in our main display and potentially lose thousands of dollars in fish and coral. But there are some things that we have to consider when we're getting ready to set up a quarantine tank. In most cases, these tanks are set up with a little bit of hastiness involved, and they haven't gone through a nitrogen cycle, which is going to present a problem because it's going to allow ammonia to build up in the tank after you put the fish in. So what do? One of the things that you can do is use a bit of filter media from an established tank and put that into the filter that you're going to be using on the quarantine system to bring some of that beneficial bacteria over to the quarantine system. It's not a full nitrogen cycle, but it will help process out some of the ammonia, and if that filter pad is large enough, maybe all of it. So if we don't have this biomedia available to use, the ammonia can accumulate in the tank, so we would have to test for it. But this presents another problem, because our typical test kits that we use are inaccurate in the presence of the medications that we might be using to quarantine the fish. So what do? The SeaChem Ammonia Alert Badge is one of the best things that you can get to put in a quarantine system. It doesn't work with reagents like normal test kits, and it will show you the presence of ammonia up to 0.5 in your quarantine system, which is the point where you would really want to be taking some action anyway. You just hang it right on the inside of the tank, and it'll let you know if there's ammonia in your system. There's a link in the description if you want to get one of those. Along that same mindset, things that we would use to detoxify the ammonia in a QT system, like SeaChem Prime, often react negatively with copper-based medications, which is what most people are using to take care of these illnesses in their fish. It creates a toxic environment by the mixing of these chemicals, and it's just not a good idea to use them. Now, I did find one article on humblefish.com, and it's linked in the description below if you want to go read it, where a person actually did some testing and they found out that SeaChem Prime is okay to use with copper power. But it's a limited article, and they even self-admittedly didn't test any of the other ones, so it's kind of inconclusive. But it's good information to have. In general, you're not going to want to mix some ammonia detoxifying agent if you're also using a copper-based medication in your quarantine. And this pretty much only leaves us with water changes as our way to manage what's going on in the aquarium. Now, you could set up a quarantine system and you could put substrate in it and live rocks and things like that and get it all the way through the nitrogen cycle, and you've basically set up a different system rather than a quarantine. This does work, and you could put the fish in there, you could observe them for a while, but if you try to medicate them in that situation, a lot of the medication is going to be absorbed by the rocks and by the substrate, and it's not going to be bioavailable in the water to be used with the fish, which is why I don't recommend running a full system as a quarantine. One thing you do want to keep in mind, though, is in the quarantine, your fish are going to want places to hide. So using something like PVC pipe or these little grass decorations that I have in mind, just give the fish a line of sight break, and it makes them feel a little bit better and reduces stress. So ammonia is definitely one of the main concerns, but it's not the only concern that we have. We have to make sure that we have adequate oxygenation in the quarantine as well. And you can do this in a bunch of different ways: an air stone bubbler or a sponge filter, which works with an air stone, a hang on the bag filter, or even just a wave maker aimed up at the surface to make sure that the surface of the water is rippling. Which, by the way, if you didn't know, the bubbles coming from an air stone are not what impart the oxygenation to the water. It's the actual breaking of the surface tension and allowing the gas exchange to happen, which is what does it. Pretty cool. And so aside from those two things, you're definitely going to just want to run a heater. Now, there is some information out there that shows that the higher you get the temperature in your quarantine, the faster things happen, and the bad things that we don't want start to die off a little sooner. 82, 83, and maybe even 84 degrees is perfectly acceptable as long as you bring it up slowly over time. You never want to put a fish from a bag that is 74 or 76 into a tank that's 84. You definitely want to make that change slowly and acclimate those fish to the quarantine. So my recommendation to you for setting up a quarantine tank is a small tank, a 5 or a 10-gallon system with a hang on the back filter, a heater, something to break up the line of sight of the fish like some decorations or some PVC pipe fittings or something like that, some brand new salt water. And the reason that I would say 5 or 10 gallons is because you don't want to go too big. You're going to be doing water changes with this, and that can get expensive in a big tank. The only other thing that you might need is whatever medications you're going to be giving to the fish, and it depends on what the fish have as to what medications you're going to have to run. So I can't recommend just one to get the job done, but I am going to have a video soon of the top medications for quarantining your saltwater fish. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that video, and then check these two videos right here on the screen now. I'm sure that you'll see something that gives you some information that maybe you didn't have before. And I'll catch you over there.